I don't think it's a stretch to presume that since Russia stormed into Ukraine, there's now a greater likelihood of China making a move on Taiwan. The Prime Minister has certainly addressed that scenario more often in the past week than he has at any time previously, as has the Defence Minister. The West's attention is understandably on Ukraine, and even our military resources are in part being distributed to that now war-torn region. That has to play into the hands of an aggressive Beijing, which has been tormenting Taiwan again this past week with fighter jets buzzing Taiwanese airspace. And in what seems to be an awareness of what China might do, following Putin's invasion, US President Joe Biden sent a senior envoy to Taiwan this week to underline America's intention, presumably, to defend, as they say, peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. But the former director of US Navy intelligence, Captain James E. Fanell, believes the president needs to do more and say more to blunt China's ambitions. I'm joined now by Captain Fannell, who comes to us live from Switzerland. Captain Fannell, thank you so much. It's an honour to have you on the program, sir. Can I ask you, you know the Chinese Communist Party and the philosophy of Beijing extremely well, don't you?
I've spent some time studying it throughout my career, yes.
Yes, that's an understatement. Is the Biden administration doing enough to dissuade Beijing from taking Taiwan militarily?
No, I do not think so. I think right now, with what we're seeing in the Ukraine, what Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party are learning, like they learned last August in Afghanistan, is that this administration would rather talk and lead with the State Department than to actually, reinforce their talk with actions from the Defense Department. So the dispatch of Admiral Mullen and that delegation and their statement on the 2nd of March, if you read it, you'll see that they talked about the global pandemic, masks, corrosive disinformation, malign influence, human rights, inclusive society. But they don't talk about China. They don't talk about the military threat that China presents to Taiwan. And I think that's I think that they were dispatched there to kind of dampen down President Tsai Ing-wen and the concerns that Taiwan has over their own safety, given what's happening to the Ukraine.
It's almost unforgivable that, given what we now know has occurred in Ukraine, that we would be, and the president would be, as equally as weak towards the regime in China.
It's very, very dangerous that we are not recognizing that when we act weak, that dictators like Putin and like Xi and Kim Jong Un in Korea and the Mullahs in Iran will advance and try to take more territory and to do more to achieve their goals. And China's goal is to take control of Taiwan like they've taken control of Hong Kong over the last couple of years. And this should scare people in the Asia-Pacific region, the Indo-Pacific region, because it doesn't seem like there's a deterrence to the PRC. And I think that's why I recognized, or I recommended that we need to recognize Taiwan as a sovereign and independent country. I think that that threshold that said we could never do that was broken when on the 21st of February, Putin recognized the two provinces in the Ukraine as sovereign and independent territories. We should not respect that anymore from the threat from China that if we do that with Taiwan, that somehow they'll start a war. They're already in the process of war right now. It's a Cold War, it's a political war, it's an information war that's been ongoing, it's an economic war, and it soon could be a military war if we don't do something different.
See, we've got this AUKUS agreement between Australia, the US and the UK. It would make sense to me, given what you say, that AUKUS itself and the three nations included in that agreement would make a joint agreement to recognise Taiwan as a sovereign country.
I think it's entirely appropriate, and I would expand that and say we should ask the Quad members, which would include India, to do the same thing in Japan. And I think in the case of Japan, you certainly would get a likely partner. And I think India is very, very concerned as well. And because of our poor performance in Afghanistan and what we're doing in Ukraine, we're losing India, and they're at risk of sliding out of the Quad. And so we need to reach out to the members and have AUKUS and Quad speak up and say, we're recognizing that Taiwan is what it is, a sovereign and independent nation.
Has Putin's move on Ukraine increased the likelihood of China moving on Taiwan in the next year or 2 years?
I think I've said all along that China is on a plan to establish their great rejuvenation, which includes the restoration of all their perceived territory. And Taiwan is the centerpiece of that. And I believe that this decade from 2020 to 2030 is the most dangerous time. I initially, over the years, had thought it would be more towards 2030. But the more that you watch what China's doing, we had the Taiwan defense minister say 2025. Former Indo-Pacific Command commander had said 2027 was likely. So it's moving to the left, closer to where we are now. What's happening in the Ukraine may adjust it a bit, but what it's doing is it's providing PLA planners and the Central Military Commission valuable lessons learned on what not to do when you conduct a military invasion like would occur against Taiwan. And so some people have said this would be a deterrent for the PRC to move. I view this as this is school. They're going to school and they're learning from what Putin's done and not done, and they will incorporate those lessons learned into their invasion plan of Taiwan.
Yeah, it's almost a drill. Final question. I saw a report this week on an Eastern European TV site, and it also was repeated on Twitter, that China was increasing its military budget to $230 billion, and they would intensify military education and training. If that's not a prelude to being ready for Taiwan, what is?
It's exactly right. We talk a lot about the exact dollar amount that the PRC spends on their military. What we need to also look at is how much they get when they spend that money. For instance, in 2021, China commissioned 22 naval warships and submarines. The United States, just 3. That's a 7-to-1 advantage for the PRC. And that ratio has been 5-to-1, 6-to-1 over the last decade. This is not good.
Yeah, not good at all. Captain James Fannell, fabulous having you with us and hearing some of your insights. I hope to catch up again with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Captain James Fannell, the former Director of Intelligence for the US Navy. This bloke has done more work on China than just about any military official in the United States.